Sengupta. My guest today is somebody I have known for more than a decade, somebody I had the pleasure of writing about in my latest book, Soul and Sword, The History of Political Hinduism, because Mr. Gurumurthy, all those decades ago, was part of a very small number of people who were thinking about alternative ways that India could approach the world and indeed the way the world could approach India. Mr. Gurumurthy, of course, is a chartered accountant by profession, but that's a very tiny part of explaining who he is. He's, of course, the editor of Tughlaq in Tamil Nadu. He also is the chairperson of the Vivekananda International Foundation, which has just published under his leadership 11 distinct volumes on re-understanding or reimagining ancient India's history. But Mr. Gurumurthy was, as I was saying, was one of those people who really looked at India holistically all those decades ago, long before the BJP was in power, to try and understand whether India could think of new ways of imagining its own destiny and course. That included economics, a subject very dear to him, politics, of course, but also a worldview. We will talk about all of these things with Mr. Gurumurthy today and try and understand how he sees India today and indeed how he sees India tomorrow. Mr. Gurumurthy, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Hindol, how are you?
I am well, sir. Thank you. And thank you for joining me. I have very fond memories of our long conversations. Let me then begin by asking you a question, in a sense, taking off from our old conversations. The 11 volumes that Vivekananda International Foundation has published, Mr. Gurumurthy, why did you think, or why did you all think, under Dilip Chakraborty's, intellectual sort of leadership, why did you think there was a need to reimagine and rewrite ancient India's history?
See, for that you have to go to the original conception of the Vivekananda International Foundation itself. In our post-independence history, we never developed a national think tank. A think tank which will not be funded from abroad and which will not even expect government grants. This has been our desire since the days I got associated personally with the idea of nationalist politics through the emergency by my participation deeply in the Indian Express, Ramnath Goenka, Achyut Patwardhan, Jayaprakash Narayan. At the age of 27, all my friends were above the age of 70. You can understand that I was exposed at a very young age. Persons of such unimpeachable character and deeply rooted in our history, in our traditions. So that is how my journey began. So you rightly said that the chartered accountancy part is a very small part of the whole journey. But that is what put me in touch with the corporate world, including Indian Express to start with. So our idea was to develop a nationalist Indian worldview. We look at ourselves through the West. It has been the case even during the freedom movement. Mahatma Gandhi or anybody, including Rajani Palmer, who started the Communist Party in England, he said India should look at it in its own way. He even mentioned Vedas as the starting point by which India should define itself. Of course, the communists changed their position several times over later. So the freedom movement was to root India in its culture, in its values, in its ancient way of life. But this did not happen post-independence. All of us know. And I don't want to go into the reasons for it. So this has been a very intense desire in me, which we will talk later as to how we moved from 1975 to 2009 when we started the Vivekananda International Foundation. You see, even during Vajpayee's period, I had a discussion with him. We started what was known as the Vivekananda International, not International Foundation. I came in contact with Ajit Doval in the year 1999 when he was an IB. And after he left the IB in 2005, both of us had thought alike. that there should be an Indian nationalist think tank which will not be influenced from abroad. This is a simple one line understanding. So I decided that I should put in all my efforts to fund it. I diverted all my corporate retainers and things like that to build a corpus. And I could only put the physical infrastructure, but the intellectual infrastructure came from Ajit Doval. So, in the trust deed, we had mentioned we will not accept any foreign donation, including from Indians abroad. This gave the definition of Vivekananda International Foundation, because money is through which you are very easily influenced, and you don't have to disclose where you got the money from. So when Vivekananda International Foundation started in 2009, we wanted to recall the idea of our freedom fighters that India should write its own history. And in fact, rewriting history and the way West has defined us, and we are quoting them repeatedly, or if there is some positive quote, we feel very happy about it. So this kind of West-induced participation in public discourse was demeaning India. And so we thought one of our projects, we did many things. Some of the things we will not even be able to say because they were so critical to the national security. But this one project we openly announced that we will bring out the ancient Indian history. It is not rewriting history. It is going to the roots, getting the irrefutable references which are available, which were ignored. And so that is how the 9 volumes started. We also got Dr. Chakraborty, who has no frills. He is a frills attached to him. He is a straightforward academician. And all that he wanted was, I may be right or wrong, but this must be a project which I have to clear every volume, every page, every line. That is how this project was started. It took a long time because, scattered details had to be brought together. And so the origin of the idea of writing ancient Indian history was aligned to the very purpose of Vivekananda International Foundation as a nationalist think tank. And we were very happy this entire project would be completed starting from 2011 and 2024. It's a massive and irrefutable document we have created. And the entire credit goes to, of course, the team which did it. But the idea is ours. That is how these volumes were released. You were also there in the function. And it was probably the first function in which things which were never discussed in the History Forum of India was discussed, and before a very, very elite and informed audience.
Choose Dilip Chakraborty. Of course, he was already well known in the archaeological work of Cambridge University. He had done stellar work there. But how did you zero in on him as the right person to intellectually push this?
Actually, we didn't directly know him. His name was suggested only by historians who felt a project of this kind requires not people who have already been evangelized into the current way of, that is, the prevalent way of writing history, which has been funded by the government, the grants from abroad. So we asked only the historians. And it is not only Dilip Chakraborty. Dilip Chakraborty headed the project. Of course, he was responsible for everything that forms the content. But some 70 odd people were involved. And so it is actually the collective consensus of many of them. It's not that we consider all the 70. But it is they who suggested this name. It is not that we chose.
In the 9 volumes, you basically cover the entire gamut of ancient India. Tell us, in your understanding, Mr. Gurumurthy, what are the two or three things that you think, after this elaborate multi-decade project has been completed, that we still misunderstand about ancient India?
You see, history, I mentioned in the course of my speech, is always a comma. There is no full stop in writing history. But what the British or the Western historians or the left historians did was to put a full stop that this is the history of India, ancient, medieval, modern times. This is where I think, like scientific discoveries, history improves with discoveries and discoveries. For example, Vedas were once considered to be merely some sound, maybe some poet. Even his language was not clear. So it mentioned about some Saraswati river, which is an imaginary thing. From there, facts have moved to maybe Saraswati existed. And there are several scientific evidence, not only ISRO, but also NASA, now hydrological findings. So if Saraswati was real, Vedas were not imaginary. But the history writing in India has not moved to this stage of accepting this fact, internalizing it, and reorienting Indian history. This point one. Number two, Vedas have been, Vedas, Upanishad, and ancient Indian thought has been found by at least dozen Nobel laureates who are scientists, that they contain answers to the modern quantum theories. Where the modern quantum theories are at a dead end, you have to look to the Vedas, Upanishads, the ancient Indian idea of a single consciousness. This is not an ordinary person's view or one person's view, it is the view of the most powerful scientific establishment. If Vedas contained scientific truth, which the modern science thinks can contain answers for its own questions, the Vedic rishis were not mere poets. They must be great thinkers. And they must have understood things which are relevant today and which are relevant even for future. But this has not come into the history writing of India. We found these are all like Newton's falling apples. We see these apples falling, but we don't know the science behind it. So, still, we have not said these 11 volumes constitute the exhaustive collection of facts. But we found that these facts were emerging from time to time and they have not been noticed at all. And so we thought, for example, the kind of information that has been brought out in how the mathematics went from India, by what rule, what is the theorems, the kind of findings our people did, how we traveled to, it's very meticulously captured. So it's not just a history of some king defeating other and occupying and taking over territories. And it's a very small part of history. What we have written is history of the human society, human evolution, science, technology, social theories, religion, spiritualism. We have captured everything. So history is not a history of only a battle between kings. This is the orientation we have given to history, ancient history in these volumes.
It's only in the recent few years, of course, that we've started to talk about things like this, Mr. Gurumurthy. For instance, the Pythagorean theorem, so to speak, Bodhayana, now we know, and many people know that Bodhayana was the first person and not Pythagoras who first came up with this, the fundamentals of this theorem and so on and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about this worldview in a broader sense now, Mr. Gurumurthy. as I mentioned in my book, Soul and Sword, you were one of the first people, long before, in fact, the BJP came to power, who was arguing with a couple of other people, like Arun Shourie and others, that India needed to reimagine the way it looked at itself and India reimagine the way it looked at the world. One of the things you argued at that time and still argue today is economics, the fundamentals of India's economics. Today, many of the things that even you and I spoke about a decade ago are sort of, grassroots re-triggering of entrepreneurship. All of those things seem to be happening again. Talk to me a little bit about how you think of Indian economics at the moment, keeping in mind India's position as the fifth largest economy now, in the world.
See, my understanding about economics came from my understanding of business and finance. I was considered to be one of the idea generators by the corporate world in the late 70s and 80s in the field of finance, in the field of accounts, in the field of law. I was known as some kind of opinion, original thinker in these areas. So this is what put me in touch with the broader idea of economics. From business economics and financial economics, I went into the larger idea of economic theories. Because of my upbringing in my own, I started from my village. So I could see there is a wide gulf between economic theory and the society. The society has no idea of what kind of assumptions are being made in making policies, which has nothing to do with its life, it has nothing to do with what it has been doing and it is doing and will continue. For example, now, of course, in my journey in the last 35 years, to classify economics as a discipline in itself and as a supervening discipline, dominant discipline, which rides over all other things, has been the fundamental error of Western economic theories. This has now been accepted. After 2008, a theory that has developed is that economics has evolved into two different things. Of course, economists themselves say it. That's why I'm saying it. Market economics and market society. Market economics is that we know. From vegetable market to stock market, market is there somewhere. But market society brings market principles into a family, into a society, into a community, into a country. Like, for instance, you can buy Coca-Cola on your forehead and walk around for 6 months and get $3,000. Or permanently etch it and get $300,000. That is, you commodify yourself. This is market society. In fact, the Economist magazine recognized this when it wrote in 2009, after Asia rose ahead of the West after the meltdown. It wrote that how Asia rose and how Japan rose. It is because they have limited market economics to the market. They have not incorporated in their daily life. And so market societies have lagged behind, and market economics, where the society and the market work together, family and the market work together, community and the market work together, culture and the market work together. This theory developed much, much later to 2008. But the Swadeshi movement thought of it in 1990. That is the most important. So we got validated by what happened later. And now one more element has come in, which is the most fundamental element, that is environment, ecology. Unless your lifestyle is aligned to these things, your economics is not only unstable, it can dynamite the world. I'll give you a small example, which I have, in fact, I told this to the Prime Minister in the context of what he has been speaking as the core value of the G20, which he headed. That is one earth, one family, one future. So I had a discussion with him and I said the content of this, the vyakhyana for this will have to be what I explained to him. He said, Guru, you deliver a speech in the Niti Ayog on this. Then I delivered a speech. I'll give you in 2 minutes what I said. You see, India has just 2.4% of the global land area. And it has 18% of human population. It has 30% of bovine population. It has 40% of cattle population. It has 8% of world's mammals, birds and mammals. It's just a wonder how this human ecological miracle takes place. It's not an accident. This could not have happened by accident. So we began to find how this happened. This is because of a philosophy, a lifestyle of coexistence. And this coexistence has made Indians cereal based in their food style, not meat based. It is not that the Indians do not take meat, but they have defined the role of meat in the plate. So our meat consumption today is 3.1 kg per head per annum. Whereas for America, it is 124 kg. And in South Africa, it is 180 and all that. But this idea that we have to live with nature has made Indians adopt cereals as the main course. And now the scientists say that cereals give 83% of calorie value and meat gives only 17%. Cereals give 63% of the protein value and meat gives only 37%. But meat gives 10 to 100 times the CO2 gas emission. Now the discourse is the world is warmed up by meat eaters. That is, who dominantly eat meat. In India also 60% of the people are meat eaters. Only 40% is vegetarian. I can understand if India is 90% vegetarian. No. We also know how to contain eating meat. On certain days we don't eat. Marriages we don't eat. On certain tithis we don't eat. We put restrictions on ourselves. With the result, we have been able to sustain such a large population, lived with animals. We transformed into worshippers of animals. We are called animals. But the fact is, even during the time when we did not have food in 1960s and 70s, the cattle population kept rising in India. So I said, this is all because of the philosophy. Philosophy gives you the object and goal of aim of life. And that gives you the lifestyle. And the lifestyle gives you the habits. And the habits say what you want and don't want. And accordingly, your production supplies. I found this whole thing actually right in front of me as our economic model. This was incorporated in the Niti Ayog resolution by the Prime Minister on the 2nd January 2015 that we will develop Bharatiya model for development. Of course, after the COVID, he redefined it as Atmanirbharta in economic terms. But what I am mentioning is that this has become such an irrefutable understanding or the Indian way of looking at the world that the world thinks today they need meat-free Mondays. They don't know how to bring down the meat because you don't have a philosophy to handle meat, because you don't have a philosophy to handle animals, because you think they are merely consumable items. So India has a message to give to the world, not only in, I will extend it to two more things. For example, in India, there are 4.9 persons per household, because we keep our parents, some grandparents, all of us live together. So if our average number of persons comes down to 2.5 like America, we will need 150 million more houses. This will cause in America a reduction of 1 person per household. When construction of 8.5 30 million houses, which cost $8.5 trillion. So our culture of living together has avoided economic catastrophe, environmental catastrophe, and social chaos. But this is not incorporated into our economics because we are a market economy and not a market society. In the same way, because we take care of our parents and even grandparents, people dependent on them, 80% of the elders today live with youngsters in India, according to the State Bank of India research. It means the government is unburdened to provide publicly funded social security for them. In America, the publicly funded social security system is running in deficit, you know it. And the current value of the future social security obligations is something like $72 trillion. This is the extent of deficit. But in India, this is culturally taken care of. So we found this whole journey, which we started in 1992, the Swadeshi movement, is now bearing fruit at the global level. This is not just an alternative. This is an alternative thought to the world. But it is our original thought, original way of looking at things, original lifestyle, original consumption pattern. If India takes to American way of eating burgers and, we will need 6 times the agricultural land we have. We will need 2.5 times the size of India. If you want to know all these details, you can get it in ourworldindata.com. So, India has a message today. This is emergence of India is not just political, it's not just geopolitical, it's not just strategic. It has a philosophy and a functioning lifestyle. It's not a philosophy stored in books. A functioning lifestyle which other nations will need to study. This is how the entire Swadeshi movement has evolved into a global message. It's no more, it's an Indian model. This is the universal model.
Interesting, Mr. Gurumurthy. Let's unpack some of the things you said now. One of the key things is meat eating and its contribution to global warming. I mean, that's undeniable now, world over. The scientific facts are very clear. Some people say that the world is in a sense moving away consistently away from meat-based diet because it's unsustainable. Sadly, the West, of course, has created plant-based diet that looks and tastes like meat, which to me seems a bit strange, but at least it's a beginning, I guess, somewhere. Talk to us a little bit about, when you talk about Swadeshi, the question of what economic nationalism really is emerges. Now, after COVID, the rush towards shorter supply chains, de-risked supply chains, sustainable supply chains, resilient supply chains have really come up. Now, our 30, 40 years of globalization, of course, taught us that these things are not that important. You can make anything anywhere, transport anything from anywhere. One Indian prime minister even used to say that we should, perhaps if need be, import all our food. So, that mindset had set in, but that there's been a dramatic change in that. Having said that, Mr. Gurumurthy, at the end of the day, some people fear that if every country becomes economically nationalistic, there would be less cooperation between nations, which is vitally needed, especially in a world which faces global warming and many other tensions. Could you explain to us what is the difference in your mind between an insular looking point of view and Swadeshi as you understand it in the broad framework of economic nationalism?
See, basically the idea of supply chains and one supply chain linking the whole world from Australia to America. This is a product of the post-Cold War idea, theory, which Francis Fukuyama explained in his End of History and Last Man. So the hereafter there is not going to be any clash anywhere. It's going to be a world of peace. And so once there is peace everywhere, then there is no problem of human beings have to spend on military and things like that, minimum things. And the entire focus will be on economics and development and living standards. So he said the market capitalism and liberal democracy have won the final war, and everywhere, everybody in the world will have to conform. This is an impractical idea. In fact, if the world has to develop, the fundamental principle is that there has to be one model, and that model will ensure that there is complete peace in the world. This was completely proved wrong by all these subsequent developments. So your idea that a single supply chain and whole world being one, and anything can be manufactured and bought and sold and eaten, this is a basically impractical idea. If any development model is to be rested on this, then you are resting the development model itself on an impractical idea. And you know, nobody even mentions Francis Fukuyama. It is now a world of not necessarily clashes, it's a world of differences. And now even that hegemonic power concept, which ensured a single model and global institutions, have, if not petered out, they have become anemic. This is all accepted. Now, an idea generated that trade has to be more local. Then somebody even developed a theory of triadization, even in the peak of globalization. 80% of the trade used to take place within the individual triads. So all the talk about globalization was going on. So my feeling is the trade, global trade will always thrive. But globalization was a disaster. There is a difference between global trade, which has always been.
Global trade in ancient times, India was trading with, Pliny the Elder was complaining about.
Everybody was trading with everybody. Africa was trading with India. We went to Africa 300, 400 years back.
Correct.
So global trade is based on the needs, the supplies. It was decided by the market in the real sense of the term, not an organized market, somebody sitting over what the rules should be. So it was a bottom upwards movement. Global trade evolved as a bottom spread movement. It evolved from the bottom. Globalization was a top-down model. It required a global institution and people sitting together, deciding disputes. This, in fact, in 1995, when the Maastricht Treaty was signed, I said this institution will collapse because it presupposes a global government which is not going to be. So I still say globalization does not promote development. Globalization promotes huge difference in income, inequality. You know how the finance world almost gets 60% of the income. Finance world. It is a finance-driven world. Production is getting the minimum. And even less is agriculture. India should be the reverse. This is because of the concept of supply chain, globalization. So my feeling is this will slowly, because of a political convergence of the world under the Western domination, the idea that global trade could be organized from top downwards has been proved wrong, and we are now rearranging ourselves. My feeling is there will be more domestic effort. There will be regional trade. In all this, one thing we have to say is the financial cheapness alone doesn't decide things. Because the environmental cost of things have to be counted. And the whole concept of lifestyle will again come into question. All this is not going to be decided in one day. It's a big U-turn that is taking place from a very wrong direction which the world has been moving. But one thing is definite. Global trade will not die. Globalization has already died.
Let's move to another topic of great interest for you, Mr. Gurumurthy. You just mentioned earlier in the conversation on how you and Mr. Ajit Doval, in a sense, ideated the idea of why something like the Vivekananda International Foundation was needed, and then you all put together, the plans and made it happen. Let's talk a little bit about strategy and how India needs a sort of strategy, security strategy. One of the great complaints always in the Indian public square is India still doesn't have a sense of, and every other diplomat I talk to talks about this, every other military man I talk to talks about this. India does not have a cohesive sense of a national security strategy, number one. And that strategy doesn't have a sort of public uptake. People in India don't have a sense at an average on what kind of security and sovereignty needs that the country has. These seem to be two holes that we haven't been able to fill till now. I wonder what you think about these.
See, the Vivekananda International Foundation has done extensive and in-depth study on the strategic traditions of India. India has been the origin of India, ancient India, Hinduism, the Vedas, the Upanishads. If you read, there is no sense of an adversary.
Right. Absolutely.
There is no theological adversary.
No, there isn't. There's
and in fact,
yes.
You should not think that somebody is another, somebody is your own man. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam concept is the way of life. It's not that, there is something which was preached and not practiced. It was practiced. And even today, that the Indian mind, no, we should not reject people from outside. If somebody had come as a refugee, we have to give him something. In which country this debate takes place? This is the Indian civilization. The person who first thought wrong persons should not have the benefit of right values was decided by Sri Krishna and Mahabharata. Who told Arjuna, kill this man? Because he is not entitled to the protection of Dharma, because he is an adharmi. This was the first major shift in strategic thinking. And then when Alexander came in contact with, Kautilya came in contact with Alexander, this is what I am saying is the Pakistan government website. The conversation between Kautilya and Alexander led Kautilya to frame an entire strategic idea of a state, a regular army, how to conquer territories and rule. And that resulted in empire building in India for at least 10 centuries, maybe even more. So, this changed because of the wrong interpretation of Ashoka's model. Ashoka did not give up the army. He gave up unprovoked war. You see, in India, unprovoked war was considered to be an adharmic war. In fact, even if you want to wage a war against another country, you are supposed to give a notice. Ashoka did not do it because of the huge deaths took place. So he felt, that there should be no unprovoked war. And no one would provoke a war against Ashoka because he was such a powerful man. But this became the norm later. And slowly, when it was coming down, Kadambari Bana wrote a thesis in 2000, in 4th century, that this Kautilya is a crook. He has promoted adharma. He has promoted state power. He has promoted wars. The result was the Arthashastra book was burnt all over the country. Only one copy was available. Where? In Tanjore. And that was gifted by the Tanjore Maharaja to Mysore Maharaja in 1907. Translated into English in 1913. The strategic gap which developed in India for nearly 1200 years, that ruined the Indian strategic thinking till Chhatrapati Shivaji came on the scene. So the Indian strategic thinking was always in clash with the source of the Indian civilization. So others do not have this problem. So this, during the independence, Mahatma Gandhi became a strategic thinker in the sense of setting the people against the state. This is the first major shift, strategic shift Gandhi gave. But post-independence, when we had secured the state, how to handle the state, not only within and also outside, we never developed. The first strategic shift, after defeats and all that, was by Indira Gandhi. 1974, she took the step of the Pokhran 1. Have you ever heard of nuclear blast for peaceful purposes?
Right.
So in like,
and this is commented upon. This is commented on. Many papers have commented upon this.
And then 1998, we said, no, we are a nuclear power. Clinton issued a statement, I still remember, a land of Buddha and Gandhi have done this. We were always land of Buddha and Gandhi. Did we ever look at us? This is a world of power. We need to handle power. We are always seen as lacking the will to power. This is an evolution which is taking place. But our civil service, our foreign service, our intellectuals, our media, all are still lagging behind. The political establishment has moved forward. We are now capable of, our state is today capable of handling the enemies within and outside. But the intellectual establishment, the so-called, I would even put it, the IFIs and other intelligence people, whether they cope up with it or not, different. India is evolving in counter strategy. We are still in the counter strategy stage. But when we emerge as a global power, for example, the decision we took on Ukraine, it was perhaps the most strategic decision that could have been taken. If we had not taken that, can you imagine the world today? The oil price could have gone, maybe hit $200. When India decided we will stand neutral and buy Russian oil for rupee, the whole world changed. So we have become strategic thinkers at the political and geopolitical level. But strategic culture has not still been internalized in the Indian discourse. So the confusion that you find is in coming to terms with the new reality. India's emergence, India's not only in economic, but also in terms of its defense, its overall intellectual capabilities. So there is a gap between the political establishment and the intellectual establishment. This will bridge once India rises and rises. Because the intellectual establishment in India always looks for some support. West was giving the support. That support has to come from India itself.
I also want to talk a little bit about now, as we come towards the end of our conversation, Mr. Gurumurthy, from strategic culture, I want to move to a subject that, again, you've been writing about on Indian democracy. Do you see Indian democracy? Because, as India rises, all kinds of things are said about Indian democracy. Indices, many of them highly flawed, depict a different picture. Concerns are raised by vested interests. Talk to us a little bit about how you see India's multi-party democracy, so to speak, and what future it has as India looks to rise from becoming the fifth largest, from being the fifth largest economy to the third largest economy in the world by the turn of the decade.
I will not merely theorize, but I will tell you my experience. So I fought against emergency. I was underground.
That's right.
I knew what emergency was. The Supreme Court in that famous case against emergency, this Jabalpur case. A question, they said, no, during emergency, no individual life right exists, including the right to life. Because all rights are suspended. Because what is the origin of this theory? The origin of this theory is the social contract theory of the West,
Yes.
where all of us feel that we are anarchists, we need a powerful person to rule. We hand over all our rights, belongings, our property, our wives, everything to you. So whatever you grant will be our rights. So that grant can be resumed by the what is known as the eminent domain.
Yes.
This principle was the basis on which emergency was justified. Justice cannot put this question. Mr. Narendra, if a person is killed for no justifiable reason, is there no right, no remedy? He said, it may shock your conscience, my lord. If a sub-inspector, out of personal revenge, shoots a person down, he has no remedy, your lordships have no work to do. This was the emergency. And CM Stephen spoke in Parliament that Parliament is supreme. Who are you, judges? The judges have to listen. They are the creature of Parliament. Swaran Singh said, you have breached the limits. This is emergency. This is autocracy. But what we are told now, that we have undeclared emergency. Undeclared emergency is an oxymoron. Emergency has no value unless it is declared. And the laws are passed. And the courts are finished. And the media is shut. So this oxymoron is being used by the very people who impose the emergency of that kind. You see, India has its own model of democracy. It is not an atomized individualist democracy. Every cultural group is assimilated into our democracy. Caste has its value, religion has its value, region has its value, language has its value. This is India. This diversity is incorporated in the Indian democracy. But these 13 person fellows, who are the liberal democrats in the world, they have no diversity at all. The same language, the same color, the same this. You have no diversity to handle. You have finished off all the diversity and taken over, because the number of people who are supposed to have been subject to genocide in America is 200 million, according to the latest studies. You wiped out all of them, took out their land and populated it with people. In the year 1800, 87% were whites. You had no diversity to handle. But we have handled diversity and baggage of thousands of years, assimilated into our democracy. Now, there are two views about Indian democracy. One is these liberal people are not going to accept anything other than liberal democracy is no democracy. Of course, we don't want any certificate from them. But is there any democracy in the world in which this mass of diversified people overthrew a constitutional dictatorship? Is there any parallel in the world without any outside supervision? I mean, you have conducted elections with some UN supervision, nothing. This country managed this. So there is something inherently sustainable in Indian democracy.
Yeah.
So now what is happening? After the Ukraine war, why is the G7 saying, no, India should be with us? Because without us, your democracy is only 1/10 of the world. You want us. At the same time, you are not able to accept we are a democracy. And so you are an inferior democracy. We have said very clearly, in fact, the Prime Minister, I was so happy an Indian Prime Minister had acquired the global status to tell the West, we don't want your lectures on democracy. It is the ultimate that I expected in my lifetime. We all, 50 years, we longed for an India whose Prime Minister will say that we don't want your certificate and we don't want your lecture. Hereafter, even if I'm not there, it doesn't matter to me. We were always lectured, you are inferior, you are this, you are this, you are this. And you fund institutions here who will repeat what you say, the media which will carry your reports. All this is ceasing to have relevance because 56% of the world lives under absolute autocracy. Only 44% is under some kind of electoral democracy. Without India, the West or the liberal West is nobody in the world, especially when its hegemonic power has weakened. So, Indian democracy has a very long tradition. Even the word samsad, which we have for our parliament, is in Rigveda. When Dasharatha chose Rama as his successor, he called a sabha in which there were barbers, there were washermen, there were goldsmiths, there were sanitary workers. He told all of them. It is in Valmiki Ramayana. He said, I have called all of you because in my opinion, Rama is the best person. But we would like to listen to you. Has it ever happened in the history or the conception or imagination or the discourse of any nation in the world, any civilization? So these fellows have no history. They have invented from social contract theory because of Locke. They brought the electors as the sovereign. They distinguished between the political sovereign and the popular sovereign. So their democracy has a very, very limited philosophical foundation. It has very little actual practice. We practice democracy right up to the villages, panchayat, communities sitting together and deciding. This understanding is not there in the Indian discourse. And so we ourselves feel somewhere, no, we have to convince the West our democracy is good enough. I think this mentality we should get over. That is one of the reasons we wanted the history volumes. It's an all-round development. And India's rise today is irreversible because we have gotten over the effect of 1989 to 2014. In just 10 years between 1989 to 1998, we had 7 prime ministers, some ruling for days, some months. Because of that, India lost. And China grew 3.5 times the size of India. And we could not build the Narmada Dam for 60 years. Whereas the Three Gorges Dam, China built in 10 years. We have now gotten over the phase of rickety coalitions and 25 parties pulling in different directions. Because of the efficiency of the government, the policy making, its image, its stature in the world was never up to the mark the world will recognize. 2014 has changed all that.
Last question, Mr. Gurumurthy. One of the things that a lot of us worry about, I mentioned it to many friends in India and overseas when the book by Professor Wilkinson came out about, caste, it was called caste. Essentially, in the West, they are now saying that all racism is not racism. It is all basically the fault of India. It is caste discrimination that comes from India. This is becoming this is being theorized. This has become, the sort of fundamental argument. Hundreds of years of slavery, all of this is now India's fault and caste, right? Talk to us a little bit of how you see this and how India should counter this.
See, actually, the idea of caste as something which has held down India was disproved by 2 researchers. One by Paul Byrock and another by Angus Madison. If caste was responsible for India's downfall or India not being able to develop, how Paul Byrock and Angus Madison said, for 1750 years, India was the leading economic engine of the world. And the Bank of International Settlements in its report of 1934 said, Between the 15th and 19th centuries, for 4 centuries, India accumulated 15% of the world's gold reserves, which means that is the export surplus India had. The Greco-Egyptian history book shows that the Roman Empire was terrified of the merchant navy of India.
Right. They used to complain that Roman coffers are being emptied because they were buying too much stuff from India. Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
Tell me, if India had such a rotten society, which it was suppressing, everybody had their role and right. This was disturbed during the British period. I tell you, in Tamil Nadu, very interesting incident. In the year 1880 or so, 82, if I remember right, the British listed the depressed caste list, that is backward caste list, some 180 or 200 categories. All those castes wrote, don't put us in backward caste list. Remove us. No caste considered itself backward. In fact, that leftist historian who wrote that book, Interrogating Caste, Dipankar Gupta, he examined some 370 odd castes. And he said, no caste accepts it is inferior. Every caste, they say, we are from Ramayana, we are from Mahabharata, we are this, we are that, we were kings. This idea that somebody is backward, somebody is this, it's a product of colonial invention. So, the castes in India know how to coexist. For example, I was part of the political movement, how we absorbed the Mandal violence into the Ramjan Bhumi movement. How? Because there is a supervening idea to which everybody owes allegiance. That is our tradition, our values, our symbols, our icons, our way of life. The West doesn't have any of these things. So they will see only the physical differences. I mean, it's a very inferior way of looking at the world and India. I think as India rises, we will be able to explain the very castes which are supposed to be the oppressed caste. They will explain to the world, gentlemen, you don't bother about this. We know how to handle ourselves.
On that wonderful note, Mr. Gurumurthy, it has been a pleasure having this conversation with you. I look forward to many more such conversations, and congratulations once again for publishing all those wonderful volumes, re-examining Indian ancient history from an Indian point of view. I congratulate you and your team at the Vivekananda International Foundation, and thanks very much once again for having this conversation with me.
Thank you, Hindol. Come to my office for a good coffee.
Yes, sir. That's your promise to me. You serve the best filter coffee in Chennai. I will return soon to have it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.